TV debuts of 1957. 1957 was a good year for television. Hollywood took over from New York City as the dominant location for primetime TV programs. Up until this time, many TV shows were still live. Now more of them were being filmed. Hollywood became the king of movies and television. Eat rocks, New York! Action shows. Zorro. Disney's Zorro series was very well liked and became a pop culture classic, despite the fact it ran only 2 seasons. 4 additional specials were made through 1961. Guy Williams became as identified with the Zorro character as Tyrone Power had so many years earlier. And Henry Calvin as Sergeant Garcia is hilarious. Children's shows. Cinderella. This live TV special isn't remembered as well as it should be. This is the only Rodgers and Hammerstein musical written for television. It starred a 21-year-old Julie Andrews as Cinderella, long before Mary Poppins fame. It was seen by more than 100 million people. There have been 2 TV remakes, one in 1965 and one in 1997. It was originally broadcast in color, but only a black and white kinescope of the earlier dress rehearsal, not the actual live broadcast, exists. This was a major ratings hit at the time, but due to technological limitations, the real broadcast, as people saw it back then, is lost television. The Pied Piper of Hamelin. This musical family film is the first made-for-television film. Van Johnson played the Pied Piper. He was already a successful actor, but became identified with this role. It was a big hit on TV. Comedy shows. Leave It to Beaver. The most 50s of all the 50 shows didn't come out until late in the decade. It ran for 6 seasons, 3 in the 50s and 3 in the 60s. It's just as much a 60s show as it is a 50s show, but everyone thinks of this as a 1950s show. It was a unique sitcom, but still innocent and fun. The children characters were the leads, with the adults more like supporting cast. Ward and June Cleaver were very important to the show, but the stories really centered around Wally and the Beav and all their friends and enemies. This show inspired countless imitations for decades, but few have matched this in success. The Lucy Desi Comedy Hour. This was really just a retooling of the I Love Lucy show, made into 1-hour programs and shown infrequently as a series of 13 specials through 1960. Unlike I Love Lucy, these shows mostly focused on guest stars and had lengthy musical numbers. Desi had serious health problems and his marriage to Lucy was falling apart, so the Ricardo saga slowly came to a close. The Real McCoys. This is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. A poor farm family from West Virginia moves to a house they inherited in California. The head of the family is Grandpa Amos McCoy, played by Walter Brennan. His newly married grandson, Luke, is played by Richard Crenna. The family has a series of funny misadventures as they adjust to a better life in California. It ran for 6 seasons and seems to have inspired, at least in part, the Beverly Hillbillies. The biggest difference between those 2 shows is that the Clampett family moved to California from Tennessee as instant millionaires. The Real McCoys often focused on the family trying to make ends meet. Drama shows. Divorce Court. Hey, I'm surprised this show started in 1957 too. It was actually a local show in Los Angeles. Someone thought a court show about couples going through divorce was a good idea. In 1958, the show was syndicated nationally. At the time of this video, Divorce Court is in its 4th incarnation. The most recent version is the longest lasting, beginning in 1999. Perry Mason. Raymond Burr became the Perry Mason everyone knows. What a lot of people may not realize is that Perry Mason was a series of novels that began in 1933. It was so popular that the first Perry Mason film was made in 1934. 3 actors played Perry Mason on screen before Raymond Burr starred in this show. This classic TV series ran 9 seasons. A short-lived revival series ran for 1 season in 1973 to 1974. Then, in 1985, a long-running series of 30 Perry Mason films were made for television. Raymond Burr starred in 26 of them before he died in 1993. The remaining films had replacement characters filling in while Perry Mason was out of town. Music shows. American Bandstand. It actually began in 1952 as Bandstand, a local show in Philadelphia. This was long before rock and roll. In 1957, Dick Clark pitched the show as American Bandstand, focused on rock and roll, and it got picked up nationally. This became the show for current popular music, one that every musician wanted to be on. It ran for 30 years on ABC, 1 more in syndication, and 1 more on the USA Network. Since this run, there have been 2 specials in 1992 and 2002. The Edsel Show. This was actually the first of many Bing Crosby specials. It made history as the first full-length show to be recorded on videotape. It was a major TV success, but the ratings didn't help the sales of its sponsor, the 1958 Ford Edsel. Also on this show were Frank Sinatra, Rosemary Clooney, Louis Armstrong, Bob Hope, Bing's son Lindsay, and the 4 Preps. The Guy Mitchell Show. Just another 1-season music show. The Jimmy Dean Show. The famous country singer had his first short-lived daytime show in 1957. His later series would be more successful. The Pat Boone Chevy Showroom. This ran for 3 seasons on ABC. The Polly Bergen Show. Polly Bergen was an extremely popular singer, actress, and TV personality. However, her weekly variety show on NBC lasted just 1 season of 18 episodes. Something went wrong, especially since this was the era of variety shows. Westerns. Have Gun, Will Travel. This popular series ran for 6 seasons and starred Richard Boone as a man in black called Paladin, a mercenary who solved terrible problems. Maverick. James Garner's career breakout. This was a western with comedy overtones, although not a straight-out wacky comedy. Garner's character of Brent Maverick was a poker-playing gambler who had a series of misadventures. The show ran for 5 seasons. Wagon Train! This popular long-running series ran for 8 seasons and starred Ward Bond as the wagon master and Robert Horton as the scout for a westbound wagon train going from Missouri to California. They met different people along the way and faced various challenges. As a matter of fact, it influenced the creation of Star Trek in 1966, pitched as Wagon Train to the Stars. Other notable TV debuts. The Royal Christmas Message from England's royal family was first televised this year. It had been an annual tradition since 1932 on radio. Queen Elizabeth II delivered this message. It continues to be done every year. Ed Asner made his TV debut in an episode of Studio One. He went on to have a fantastic career in TV and movies, but really hit his stride as Lou Grant in the comedy series The Mary Tyler Moore Show. He even got his own successful spin-off series, Lou Grant, that was a drama show. Peter Falk, long before he became Columbo, made his TV debut in an episode of Robert Montgomery Presents. One thing you'll notice, no matter how far back you go, is that Peter Falk was always a good actor. Last but not least, the movies of 1957. There were many, many movies released in 1957. This is an overview of the movies that were the most popular and those that are otherwise noteworthy. Elvis movies. Elvis movies are very distinctive. There's nothing else like them. Critics have always been pretty dismissive of Elvis Presley's movies, but they are still the most watched movies of the 1950s and 60s. These movies weren't trying to impress you with Elvis's acting. They were just fun, colorful movies with a few songs here and there. It was a style that caught on with fans. He made 2 movies this year, Loving You and Jailhouse Rock. The latter film became one of his most iconic movies, especially for the Jailhouse Rock musical number. Rock and roll movies. This is a weird little subgenre of movies. Legendary disc jockey Alan Freed was the pioneer of this kind of film. They weren't really musicals, but they couldn't afford to be Elvis movies. There would be a story, of sorts, but the movies would largely consist of musical performances from the big stars of the day. As times changed, this kind of movie evolved into the beach movie, then the hippie movies of the late 60s. Jamboree. Alan Freed and his DJ rival Dick Clark both appeared in this movie. This had a ton of famous rock stars in it, including, but not limited to, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, Frankie Avalon, Carl Perkins, and Connie Francis. For some reason, country singer Slim Whitman was also in it. Jerry Lewis. The team of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis split up in 1956, and it was an ugly split. Both of them went on to have extremely successful solo careers, more success than they ever had as a team, and they were already plenty popular. Jerry Lewis made 2 movies this year, The Delicate Delinquent and The Sad Sack. The latter film was based on the funny comic book series from Harvey and was a hit. Dean Martin's first film after the split was 10,000 Bedrooms. This movie did not do well, but it didn't stop Martin from becoming one of the biggest movie properties of the 1960s and 70s. The Three Stooges. This was a dark period for the Three Stooges. Curly was long gone. Shemp was gone. Joe Besser became the new third stooge. They made 8 shorts this year that are just so hard to watch. Joe Besser was good in other roles before and after the Stooges, but for some reason or another, he just wasn't a good fit for the Stooges, and the partnership lasted only a year and a half. All of the shorts the Stooges did with Joe Besser were filmed from 1956 to 1957, but they were released in theaters from 1957 to 1959. It wasn't just Joe Besser. The budgets for the shorts were cut to ribbons, often recycling old footage. They were even shorter than before. This was the end of the Three Stooges shorts, but they came back strong in 1959 with feature films and a new partner, Curly Joe Dorita. Other comedy movies. Ma and Pa Kettle on Old MacDonald's Farm. This was the last of the popular Ma and Pa Kettle movies and the only one to star another actor as Pa. The movie wasn't a great success at the time, but I don't know why. It was actually a good film, and I even liked Parker Finelli as Pa. He had good success in his acting career and became popular as the Pepperidge Farm guy in commercials from 1956 to 1977. Don't remember him? Pepperidge Farm remembers. Sorry, I had to do it. This was also Marjorie Maine's very last film. She acted for 1 more year on television, then retired. Designing Woman. A romantic comedy film with Gregory Peck and Lauren Bacall. Don't Go Near the Water, starring Glenn Ford. This movie helped establish Ford's reputation as a dependable comic actor. He had been previously known for extremely serious roles. Ford had done a comedy film the year before this called The Tea House of the August Moon that was very successful and led to him doing this movie, which was also a success. A King in New York. Charlie Chaplin was still making movies in 1957? It's true, but this movie didn't see American release until 1972. Why? Chaplin was exiled from America in 1952 due to considerable pressure from FBI head J. Edgar Hoover during the communist hunt known as the Red Scare or McCarthyism. Chaplin denied being a communist, but he definitely wasn't in agreement with the American government on a lot of things. A King in New York was certainly influenced by his personal experiences. He made this movie in England, premiered it in Paris, and did not allow it to be released in America. He didn't even allow American press to attend the premiere. Chaplin was that bitter about things. Cutting America off from seeing the film really hurt its revenue. It was only a modest success in Europe. The production values were crude compared to what he was doing in Hollywood, and a lot of people found the satire to be too bitter. The movie finally saw American release on March 8, 1972. The next month, on April 10th, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences offered Chaplin an honorary award. Initially, he was reluctant to accept, but he ultimately decided to come, and it was the first time he had been in the US for 20 years. It meant a lot to him that he hadn't been dismissed by the American public. A few months after that, J. Edgar Hoover died. 1972 was a good year for Charlie Chaplin. The Little Hut, a romantic comedy with Ava Gardner and David Niven. Operation Madball. Although this is a mostly forgotten military comedy, it's significant for two things. One, it's the first time Jack Lemmon received top billing in a movie. Two, it's the first major screen role for comedian Ernie Kovacs. The Prince and the Showgirl. Amazingly, not one of Marilyn Monroe's most popular movies, despite the fact she co-starred with Laurence Olivier. It did well in Britain, but not so hot in America. Public Pigeon No. 1, starring Red Skelton. This film is actually a feature-length remake of an episode of TV's Climax, also called Public Pigeon No. 1, and also starring Red Skelton. And it was made just 2 years earlier. Tammy and the Bachelor, starring Debbie Reynolds and Leslie Nielsen. This is the first of 4 Tammy movies, a light-hearted comedy series about a naive girl from Mississippi and her romantic adventures. It also inspired a short-lived TV series, Tammy, from 1965 to 66. Will success spoil Rock Hunter? Jayne Mansfield had been in movies for 2 years. Some did better than others, especially The Girl Can't Help It from the year before. But this movie became her signature hit. Tony Randall is Rock Hunter. Adventure movies. Babyface Nelson. It may surprise some Mickey Rooney fans that he would ever play a bad guy. Babyface Nelson had been a real-life gangster who lived as brutally as he died. This put Rooney in a whole new light and was a far cry from his Andy Hardy days. The film was a financial success and kicked off a string of films where he played a tough guy. The Burglar, a crime film starring Dan Duryea and Jayne Mansfield. Don Quixote. The classic story has been made into a lot of movies. This was made in Soviet Russia and was the first Don Quixote film to be shot in both widescreen and color. Fire Down Below. This movie didn't do well at the time, and it's not very celebrated today. It starred 3 big-name actors, Rita Hayworth, Robert Mitchum, and Jack Lemmon. It was Hayworth's highly anticipated return to movies after a 4-year absence. The movie shouldn't have bombed, but it did. In show business, nothing is guaranteed. Jet Pilot, starring John Wayne and Janet Leigh. This movie, starring Wayne as an Air Force pilot, had a troubled production. It was produced by Howard Hughes, originally as an RKO Pictures movie. However, by the time this movie was finally released, Hughes had sold RKO to Universal. Filming had started in 1950 and, allegedly, did not finish until 1953. Hughes kept tinkering with the finished product and kept it from being released in a more timely manner. The movie touted the most current airplanes of the Air Force, but by the time the movie was released, the planes were either on the old side or obsolete. The final budget is reported to have ranged anywhere from $4 to $9 million. Absolutely incredible for the time. Ultimately, this movie didn't make much of an impression on the public. John Wayne thought it was one of his worst movies. Howard Hughes, however, considered this his favorite film, and allegedly watched it a lot in his later years. Johnny Tremaine. Disney made this movie for television, but first released it in theaters. It is set right before the outbreak of the American Revolutionary War. Legend of the Lost, starring John Wayne and Sophia Loren in a treasure hunting movie. My Gun is Quick. Robert Bray stars as the famous detective character Mike Hammer. Search for Paradise. This was actually a documentary film about the United States Air Force. It made a whole lot of money, and was actually one of the top grossing films this year. However, it's nowhere near as remembered as so many of the other movies from 1957. Witness for the Prosecution. This legal mystery thriller made a lot of money. It had a big name cast, led by Tyrone Power and featuring Marlene Dietrich, Charles Laughton, and many others. Westerns. 3:10 to Yuma. The original version of this popular western starred Glenn Ford. Decision at Sundown with Randolph Scott. Gunfight at the OK Corral. A majorly successful western movie this year, starring Burt Lancaster as Wyatt Earp and Kirk Douglas as Doc Holliday. It wasn't meant to be historically accurate, but it was entertaining and made nothing but money. Night Passage. James Stewart is the hero and Audie Murphy, in a rare instance, is the villain. The Tin Star. A low-budget western with a surprisingly big-name cast, led by Henry Fonda and Anthony Perkins in one of his first roles. It's one of the few B-westerns that was ever nominated for an Oscar for Best Screenplay. Since this time, it has become a western classic. Horror and science fiction movies. 20 Million Miles to Earth. A space monster invades the Earth. Abominable Snowman, starring Forrest Tucker and Peter Cushing. The Black Scorpion. Richard Denning and Mara Corday star in this film about giant black scorpions in Mexico. This movie, at the time, wasn't a fantastic moneymaker, but it gained cult status over the years, and a lot of people enjoy it in one way or another. Monster movie fans are quirky people. The Curse of Frankenstein, starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. This horror movie broke new ground in a number of different ways. Hammer Films made a lot of horror movies. This was their first horror movie in color, and their first Frankenstein film. It was also the first really gory horror movie, showing blood and guts in living color. It established Hammer Horror as a distinctive brand of horror cinema. The worldwide success of this film also allowed the company to release new versions of Dracula and the Mummy in 1958 and 1959 respectively. Their Dracula film, in particular, was so well received that it sparked a long, successful series establishing Christopher Lee as the most popular Dracula actor, second only to Bela Lugosi. The Deadly Mantis. A giant praying mantis wreaks havoc. The Giant Claw. About a giant monster bird. This is one of those bad movies that people seem to love as a guilty pleasure, and it's been a staple of the bootleg video market. It had very few official home video releases until the late 2000s. Since then, it has been more common to find on DVD. This is another example of something that was not a great hit at the time, but went on to become a classic of sorts. Incredible Shrinking Man, starring Grant Williams. This movie made money at the time, but it has grown even more well-liked as time has gone on. It was well done, especially for 1957, and made the whole idea of a microscopic person in a giant world really hip. The premise has been used countless times since then. Does Fantastic Voyage or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids come to mind? The Monster That Challenged the World. Tim Holt, who was best known as a Western star, saves the Earth from an army of giant mollusks, looking like caterpillars, that came from the sea. Quatermass 2. A sci-fi horror movie from Hammer Films. This is also believed to be the first ever film sequel to have a 2 suffix in the title. In this exciting sequel to the Quatermass experiment, the Professor hero saves the world from an alien invasion. The Seventh Seal. This Swedish film ultimately became known as a cinematic masterpiece, although it wasn't a huge moneymaker at the time. A knight, played by Max von Sydow, plays chess with the Grim Reaper, who has come to take his life. Will the knight beat death at chess and get to live? This is more of a fantasy drama film than true horror, but let's face it, the Grim Reaper is pretty scary. Drama and romance movies. 12 Angry Men. Henry Fonda was the lead of an all-star cast in this intense courtroom drama centered on the jurors. This is often regarded as one of the best movies ever made. An Affair to Remember, a romance film with Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr. Bo James. This is the second of only 2 dramatic roles for the legendary comedian Bob Hope. His first was the film Seven Little Foys, released 2 years earlier, but that had a lot of comedic moments. After all, it was based on the life of vaudeville star Eddie Foy. This film, however, was based on Jimmy Walker, the controversial mayor of New York from 1926 to 1932, and is quite a bit darker. Bridge on the River Kwai. This movie was major super big time huge. To this day, if you're not familiar with the film, you've probably heard the title mentioned by someone. This was the highest grossing movie of the year in America, Canada, and Britain. It's acclaimed as one of the greatest war films ever made. William Holden was the lead. It also starred Alec Guinness. The D.I. A lot of people may not realize that Jack Webb did other things besides Dragnet, but this is one of them. It's a military drama about Marine life, and Webb plays the toughest of all drill instructors. Edge of the City, starring Sidney Poitier. This movie was considered unusual for the time due to its portrayal of an interracial friendship. Island in the Sun. This was a moneymaker, but highly controversial due to its on-screen portrayal of an interracial relationship between Joan Fontaine and Harry Belafonte. This was also Dorothy Dandridge's comeback movie after a 3-year absence. A Face in the Crowd. Andy Griffith in a drama movie? A lot of other people felt that way too. At the time, the movie didn't do all that well, but audiences liked Andy Griffith. This movie launched him into stardom. Since its original release, though, the movie has become better liked. A Farewell to Arms, starring Rock Hudson and Jennifer Jones. This was the second movie based on Ernest Hemingway's novel and a monster hit this year. It made so much money. Heaven Knows, Mr. Allison, with Robert Mitchum and Deborah Kerr. Man of a Thousand Faces. James Cagney stars in this biographical film about horror movie actor Lon Chaney. Roger Smith played his son, the legendary Lon Chaney Jr. The real Lon Chaney Jr., who was still alive and quite active, was not in the film. This film is not an entirely accurate account about the lives of the Cheneys, but it was a success. Old Yeller. This Disney film, a Western drama, was a smash success. What people remember most about this film is one of the most tearful moments in cinematic history. A boy has to shoot Old Yeller, his dog. What isn't remembered as much is the fact that the movie doesn't end there. The boy gets one of Old Yeller's pups and names him Young Yeller. What's remembered even less is the fact that this legendary film had an official sequel in 1963 called Savage Sam that didn't do anywhere near as well as this movie. Peyton Place. This movie was a smash hit, the ultimate soap opera. It had a large cast full of name actors headed by Lana Turner. It was also full of bad doings and other taboo subjects, including incest and rape. Heavy stuff for 1957. People liked this movie so much that it had a sequel in 1961, a TV series from 1964 to 69, and a revival series from 1972 to 74. The things that went on in Peyton Place were so messed up that the very name of it became synonymous with sexual scandal. Raintree County. So many big names in this Civil War era romance film. The top three were Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor, and Eva Marie Saint. This made a lot of money, but it cost a lot and still lost roughly $500,000. Saint Joan, a biographical film about Joan of Arc. Sayonara. Marlon Brando was the lead of this all-star cast. It was a major moneymaker where Brando played an Air Force fighter pilot who falls in love with a Japanese dancer. The Spirit of St. Louis. James Stewart plays legendary pilot Charles Lindbergh. Musicals. Musicals were really hurting by 1957 and on their way out. Why? There are a number of reasons. Since talking pictures began, there had been musicals. A lot of them. And the genre just played out. Times had changed, and this kind of music wasn't as popular anymore. It was the rock and roll era. Also, doing good musicals was getting too costly, and there simply wasn't enough profit to be made. Musicals have never completely died off. It simply moved to television when variety shows were still huge. A lot of movies, well into the 1960s, would feature one or two musical numbers. However, the era of film musicals being a major movie genre was coming to a close. April Love, with Shirley Jones and Pat Boone. Funny Face, with Audrey Hepburn and Fred Astaire. When this movie was first released in theaters, it flopped hard. Years later, in 1964, Audrey Hepburn did the hugely successful movie My Fair Lady. Right after that, Funny Face was re-released in theaters and drew huge crowds, finally turning a profit. Timing is everything. The Joker is Wild. Frank Sinatra starred in this biographical musical about the real-life singing star Joe E. Lewis. It was a success, and Sinatra actually became friends with the real Joe E. Lewis because of it. Les Girls. Gene Kelly's last MGM musical and a commercial disappointment. The Pajama Game, starring Doris Day and John Raitt, Bonnie Raitt's dad. Pal Joey. Unlike a lot of musicals this year, Pal Joey was a big monster hit. It starred Frank Sinatra, Rita Hayworth, and Kim Novak. Film debuts of 1957. All of these people would enjoy long, successful acting careers, but their film debuts weren't always memorable. Norman Alden as the Master of Ceremonies in Hear Me Good. Alden never became a megastar, but he was a good actor who worked a lot. Some of the films and TV shows he did were beneath his talent, but he could make even a terrible production passable. Alan Arkin as the lead singer of the Terriers, an actual folk music group, in Calypso Heatwave. Arkin went on to have a fantastic career, and he's gotten even better with age. Alain Delon as Joe in Send a Woman When the Devil Fails. This French actor became one of Europe's greatest sex symbols in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. He's had an incredible career. Delon could never quite make it big in America, but he's well known to a lot of Americans for playing Zorro in the 1975 film of the same name. Catherine Deneuve as schoolgirl in The Twilight Girls. She was only 12 when this movie was made, but ultimately became one of the sexiest, most successful French actresses of all time. Ben Gazzara as Jaco de Paris, the antagonistic lead of The Strange One. Gazzara played good guys and bad guys, but he always seemed to excel at playing bad guys. This movie was also the film debut of Georges Peppard as Cadet Robert Marquardt. Clifton James also made his film debut in The Strange One as Colonel M.N. Ramsey. I like this guy. His name may not be recognizable to you, but you have most likely seen him in some movie or TV show from the 70s and 80s. He seemed to specialize in playing dim-witted, occasionally racist Southern sheriffs, always in a comedic vein. He was Sheriff J.W. Pepper in the James Bond movies Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. Clifton played a similar character in the Richard Pryor movie Silver Streak and Superman 2, as well as the pilot episode of TV's Heart to Heart. He didn't just play Southern sheriffs, but this became a recognizable stock character. Clifton had a way of playing likable buffoons, even if they had bad traits. That's a talent. William Hickey as Apples in A Hatful of Rain. Hickey seemed to specialize in playing funny, creepy, or otherwise quirky guys in a wide variety of comedy movies and other offbeat films. Sally Kellerman as Marcia in Reform School Girl. She did have a successful career, but her breakout role was the original Hot Lips Houlihan in the 1970 film MASH. Lee Remick as Betty Lou Fleckham in A Face in the Crowd. She pretty much stayed a dramatic actress for her entire career. Ray Walston as Lieutenant McCann in Kiss Them For Me. His breakout success did not come until 1963 with the TV series My Favorite Martian. After that, he worked a lot playing all kinds of funny, quirky characters. The only thing that slowed his career down in the mid-1990s was poor health. Even then, he worked right up until the end. Adam West as Weather Station No. 4 radio operator in Voodoo Island. He wasn't always Batman. As a matter of fact, nothing he did from 1957 to 1966 would ever have tipped you off to him becoming Batman. When the classic TV series started in 1966, his name became synonymous with the character. There would be many other Batman actors, but anytime you hear Adam West, the first thing you think is Batman. What a fascinating year. I hope you enjoyed your stay. A lot of new things were falling into place, while a lot of old things were going by the wayside. It happens, but not always like it did this year. Come back to my video time machine whenever you want to revisit the year 1957.